First thing I'm gonna do is go ahead and put my teacher's letter. This is gonna be C4, and I'm gonna circle it. And then I'm gonna write my name. My name is Dr. A. Please don't write Dr. A on your paper. Please write your name on your paper. And then you're gonna flip your paper over and get ready to start. We're gonna work on our dragon eye project today. So I have a piece of watercolor paper. I have a pupil eye cabochon, and I also have some Model Magic. So for this first part, what we're gonna do is basically create the actual texture. So this is a texture, actual texture, like that you can feel the bumpiness with your hands. And then we're going to paint out the rest of the texture and create some implied texture. So that part will actually be flat and we'll just give the illusion that it is a continuation of the actual texture. So it's a little experiment, a textural experiment. So we're going to take the Model Magic clay. When you're not using it, keep it in the foil so that it doesn't dry out quite as quickly. And what I like to do to get started is I like to just roll sort of a little sphere, and then I'm just gonna squish it into a pancake. So it's kind of rounded, and I'm just gonna shape it. I'm gonna tug on the corners. I'm gonna shape it into sort of an eyeball shape. So it's gonna be sort of oval or almond shaped. The shape is up to you. It can be very round. It can be pointed on the corners. It could be teardrop shaped. Eyes come in lots of different shapes and sizes. I kind of like my my eyes to be a little bit sort of almond shape or lemon shape. That's what I see in the mirror. So I'm gonna kind of figure out where I want it on the paper. You can put it at an angle as if the dragon was sort of dipping his head down and peeking in a small window. I'm gonna put mine at kind of an angle. You can put it straight, you can angle it up, you can angle it down. This is kind of like the corner of the eye closest to the nose or the nostril. And I'm just gonna take my finger and I'm just gonna press it into the paper. Pull it off, but I'm gonna go ahead and stick it on there. It should stick pretty well for now. I'm gonna go ahead and take my dragon cabochon and I'm gonna place it in the shape of the eye. So remember, this is sort of like our base. This Model Magic really likes to stick to itself. It doesn't much like to stick to anything else. So I'm gonna press my cabochon in there, kind of make a little dent. And then I can go ahead and start adding my details. I'm gonna give an eyelid. So one of the ways I can do that is to pull off a couple of small pieces here. And I'm gonna roll it into a coil shape. And then I'm just gonna make that sort of opening for the eye. That's also gonna work to secure my gemstone, my cabochon. A cabochon is a bead of sorts that is curved on one side, flat on the other. So this one is actually a glass bead and it has a sticker on the back that looks like a dragon's eye or a pupil or some kind of animal or lizard pupil. Okay. And I'm just going to press this down to make sure it's sticking. I'm also going to overlap the gemstone just a little so that it's going to hold in place. I can start to add my scale texture. For example, if I wanted to have some longer pieces, I think I don't, so I'm going to take that off. I can rework these into smaller dots. I can make some scale shapes like this, and make them kind of like fish scales that are flat. So I'm just making a dot, rolling a small sphere, and then I'm flattening it into a dot. I can also make spikes as well, and the spikes would look something like this. So I would roll it into a ball, and then instead of flattening it, I would just twist it in my fingers and then sort of push down. Kind of makes this Hershey's Kiss kind of shape. And I could certainly add a series of spikes around the eye. Sometimes you see that in some lizards. This one seems like it's a little big. So I'm gonna go ahead and make it a little smaller. I might add a little spikes on there. And I'm just gonna keep adding these little pieces of clay all the way around until I either run out of clay or I get the pattern, the scale pattern, just like I wanted it to. And I am kind of trying to press it down against the paper. So I want it to go flat down against the paper as I'm working it so that it does come down and touch the paper. And when I start drawing it kind of makes sense that it continues. Once you've got your dragon eye sculpted, you can return any extra clay and then throw away this foil piece in the trash can. If you have extra clay, just tuck it back in the foil and return it to me. And then what we'll do is we'll let this dry overnight. So we're gonna let this dry for a little bit and then we'll come back and start drawing out the scales. Now that the clay has dried, it won't be hard, but it will still be soft, but it won't be shapeable. So if you try to move something or reshape it, it will just crack off and break. So you want to make sure that you don't try to move anything that's already been drying. If you needed to add more clay to it, you could do that, but hopefully you finished your design the first time, because once you add more clay to it, it has to dry before you can paint it. So this one is pretty dry. Occasionally it'll come unstuck from the paper. If that happens to you, just get some liquid glue and put a little glue underneath and set it on there. It will take 45 minutes for it to dry, but you can go ahead, start drawing and painting while it's sort of adhering. So you might notice that the back of your paper has like a little lump on it where the moisture from the clay has seeped into the watercolor paper. But today what we're going to work on is continuing this textural pattern onto the paper and out so that we can start painting it. So I have rounded scales. You could have pointed scales. You could have W-shaped scales. Your scales could be shaped any way you want. But you'll notice that I have small and large scales. And as you go away from the eye, the scale is getting larger. So I'm going to continue that pattern and just lightly draw in this sort of, these are about the same size, but they're starting to get a little larger. So I'm gonna just start drawing in some of the scales based on the pattern that I sculpted. And I'm gonna keep working on that until I get to the edge of all four sides of my paper. Now that I have my scales all drawn in, you'll notice that I included a couple other parts of the dragon head, or like that sort of lizard head. And also that the scales change in different areas. Just like your skin, you have different skin texture on your hand versus the under part of your arm versus the tip of your nose versus the bottom of your feet. It's because each area of skin has a certain job that it has to do. And so it has a little bit of a different texture. Same thing with reptiles. So the scales around the eye are tighter together to protect the eye when it closes. The scales along the nose are a little bit tighter together. They get a little pointier. Here's a nostril, a dragon nostril. It probably could be a little lower, but I think it works out. And then as it goes away from the face and towards sort of the chin and the neck of the dragon, the scales get larger and sort of more pointed. I also included a little area that would be sort of like the top of the head. If the dragon's eye is on one side and it's coming at you, you would only see one eye in a profile. You could see one nostril. We won't see the mouth or the teeth because it would be much further down here on the paper, but we could see a little bit of color that is not dragon, maybe in the corner, sort of diagonal from the eye if you wanted to, or you could just fill the whole paper with scales. It's completely up to you. You're the designer. Now that we have our actual texture and our implied texture or visual texture, our 3D and our 2D texture, it's time to start painting. So I have a set of watercolors here, and on the top of my watercolor, I have my bowl of water. You can also use this plastic area on top of the paint set, like beside the paint set, to mix colors as well. It won't be absorbed into the plastic, so you can mix the color and then transfer it to your paper pretty easily. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the scales. You can choose to paint the sculpture first, or you can work on some of the scales out here. I'm going to do some of the scales on the paper just to give you an idea of how we're going to add highlights and shadows. So first I'm going to pick a color scheme. I don't want my dragon to be yellow because his eye is very yellow. So I might start with a cooler color. So I might wake up, let's see, I'm going to start with sort of a light color to sort of put the highlight on that scale. And then I could add a little bit of a darker color towards the edge. Those don't look that different to me, so I might add a little bit of purple. There will be a shadow here where the front scales are overlapping. Get a little bit more purple on here. So there's going to be a little bit of a darker area here. And then I might just rinse out my brush, just kind of bring this back a little bit with the water. And it will get a little lighter as I get closer to the edge. Now, if I add yellow to this, it's probably going to come out more green, but that might be okay because it's still going to give like a little shiny highlight on the end of my dragon scale. And I would just repeat this. I can change the color slightly. So I started on one of the pointed scales, perhaps the let's see, maybe the rounder scales are a bit more of a warm color, and they're going to transition from this sort of magenta into more of a purple color. That could be a possibility. Put a little bit of darker purple in that magenta. And I'm just going to drag this color out to the edge. I really like that. So I'm going to keep adding the magenta along these scales. I want to make sure that I'm painting each scale individually so that they don't become one big blob of scales, if you will. I want to make sure that we get a little bit of that sort of darkness in there. Get a little purple. Add to the magenta. This watercolor paper is very thirsty, so once it starts to dry, you might say, wow, you know what I need? I need a little bit more of this darker color in here, so I'm going to bring it in here, and I'm just going to add a little bit more darkness on the darker side. It's a good idea to let it dry a little bit more than I did, because if not, what will happen is it'll start to bleed scale to scale, and you don't really want it to jump over. So it'll leak into the next scale because the watercolor can't actually see the color that you're painting. It's just a pencil line. So once I get sort of a color scheme that I like, maybe I'm going to have more magenta on this side, and I'll do a little more purple on this side. The more water you have in your brush, the lighter or more muted the color will be. So you might have to add water to wake up your colors, and then you might have to just, you know, use it. You can use a paper towel to sort of pat the extra water off on your brush if you have a paper towel handy. This is very wet, so I don't want to add any more color to this part right here until it dries. But I'm going to keep going. I really like this magenta and purple color scheme, so I'm going to keep the magenta sort of to the right side. And then keep the purple to the left side so that it doesn't bump up against each other, if that makes sense. So then what happens is the scales look like they're overlapping, but really they are, they're bumping, the magenta is bumping against the purple. And so that I didn't do that here, but I think it does look better when I do that. So then I'm using the lighter color on one side and the darker on the other. I can just blend them together, and that creates some separation. And I'm just gonna keep painting this until I get all the way finished with it. Once you've finished with your dragon eye, you should have the clay painted. It paints very similarly to the paper. It's just a little less thirsty. And then if you do create a break, you know, where you see the edge of the dragon's head near its eye, that's a good eyeball break. Just a sort of solid area to kind of give your eyes a place to rest with all of this color and pattern going on. And so you can see it's difficult to tell where the sculpture ends and the actual painting begins. So this is actual texture that you can feel with your fingers, and this is implied or visual texture. So it's meant to mimic the sculpture, and that's the dragon eye.